What has happened, everyone? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 13 of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, an episode called Such Sweet Sorrow, which you thespians out there will recognize from Act 2, Scene 2 of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I might come across as a little bit delirious in this video because this will be my 4th upload in less than 24 hours. I've got Hellboy and the Orville and Star Wars Episode 9 and Star Trek all swirling around in my brain, and I probably should just go for a bike ride to flush all this media out of my head for a bit. But as soon as I'm finished with this review, I can start my weekend, so we're going to push on through. But before I get to my official recap and review, I did want to give folks a heads up that the new Star Trek Deep Space Nine documentary, What We Left Behind, will be getting a theatrical release on May 13th. So if you've never watched that amazing show, you've got about a month to get totally caught up. And at some point, I think I need to do just a proper live stream discussing highlights of Deep Space Nine on this channel. But for now, let's just focus on Discovery. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I haven't necessarily been the most vocal admirer of Season 2. I feel like this season's had its fair share of ups and downs, but in my opinion, the high watermark of the show creatively remains the episodes from Season 1, where the crew explored the Mirror Universe, where the show had this playful sense of devilish fun that has never really been able to recapture. But given what we've learned so far about what's likely to happen to Discovery and its crew after next week's finale, perhaps there's a good reason to get excited about the future. Quite literally, because it appears as if at least the ship and some of the principal cast will be traveling into the future, which would allow the show to carve out its own destiny with its own stories without constantly stepping on the toes of stories that have come before. That kind of clean slate would be precisely what this show needs at this point to shake off some of the baggage that has weighed it down throughout both seasons so far. My assumption is that next week's finale is just going to be wall-to-wall action, which is why the writers felt compelled to have pretty much every character say their goodbyes to friends and loved ones throughout this episode. Now, depending upon your feelings about the majority of the characters on this show, reactions to this episode are going to vary pretty wildly. If you're in love with this crew, you likely spent the entire episode blinking back tears, feeling waves of chills, all the wonderful human emotions that we expect to feel when watching a show we love. But for me, and I realize what a cold-hearted, cynical bastard this is going to make me sound like, but I pretty much felt nothing. One scene in particular made me realize just how little emotional investment I have in these characters. As Pike is making his farewells to some of the key crew of the Discovery, he calls them out individually by name and then draws attention to something truly remarkable about their career or their conduct. But if someone put a gun to my head and asked me to identify all these characters by name just from memory, I would end up with a skull full of bullets. In spite of having done recaps and reviews of every single episode from both seasons, so many of these characters remain total strangers to me, so parting with them was no form of sorrow whatsoever. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First, I should do a quick summary of what went down in terms of the plot. In an effort to protect the sphere data from falling into the hands of Control, the crew of the Discovery completely abandons ship and boards the Enterprise in order to self-destruct Discovery from a distance. Not only does the ship refuse to comply, but it also protects itself with shields when the Enterprise blasts it with photon torpedoes. Their conclusion is that the sphere data has merged with the ship to such a degree that it's now trying to protect itself like a living thing. An idea that I think could be developed in really interesting ways if the ship continues to evolve as its own life form next season. With all that information at its fingertips, the ship could end up being the most advanced ship in the entire galaxy. At any rate, the crew of the Discovery as well as the Enterprise, they put their best minds together and they decide that the best way to remove Discovery from the chessboard is to rebuild the Red Angel suit and have Burnham open up a wormhole into the future, hiding the ship from Control forever. Many key members of Discovery's crew decide that Burnham can't make the sacrifice all by herself, and they decide to venture into the unknown alongside her. The episode draws to a close as Section 31, aka Control, arrives and our fearless heroes prepare for battle. Now, Saru did a pretty good job of saying prepare for battle, but for me, there's only one person who knows how to really do it well, and that would be Ian McKellen as Gandalf in Return of the King. In broad strokes, the plot didn't bother me in the least, and I'm genuinely curious to see what the future might hold for these characters, but in terms of execution, there were several details about the Zep that kind of irked me. This might sound petty, but it blows my mind that this show is still trying to clean up the continuity about the use of holographic communications. In the middle of a crisis that can mean the end to all sentient life, Rebecca Romijn's character proudly tells Pike that all holographic communications have been removed from the Enterprise. I get that the writers are trying to clean up a mess that should have never been made in the first place, but the damage has already been done. The show just needs to move on. I did enjoy, however, the attempt of recreating the aesthetics and the sound effects that we associate with the Enterprise without simply recreating the sets entirely from the late 60s, which would have been truly bizarre. So it felt familiar, it felt like the Enterprise, but it wasn't an exact replica. But the biggest source of aggravation for me this episode were the frequent attempts of being cute. Puppies can be cute. Kittens can be cute. Babies are cute. But when characters from Star Trek try to be cute and adorable, talking about ice cream and playing with their utensils while solving complex problems, it just makes me wish someone would take my head and dunk it in boiling oil and spare me the agony of enduring this show. For those of you who skip watching the short treks and don't know what I'm talking about, the Queen of Zaia, who appeared in my least favorite of the 4 short films, makes a return in this episode to save the day alongside her bestie, Tilly. If there's any justice in the world, we will never have to see those two characters interact ever again. But the flip side of this nauseating cuteness were some visions of the future, courtesy of the Time Crystal, where characters see Leland laying waste to the heroes of the show. So at least there was some balance between the darkness and the light in this episode. So the only real question for me going into the season finale is how Spock is going to end up back on the Enterprise before Discovery goes through the wormhole. He very kindly offers to join Burnham on her adventure, but as we all know, Spock has a few more chapters left in his story. I'll also be curious to see if they decide to rewrite Pike's backstory in terms of when he gets crippled and burned. Originally, he was crippled helping cadets aboard a training vessel where he was bombarded with radiation, but in that this show has placed such heavy emphasis on his eventual fate, there's at least the possibility that the writers might want to try and include that scene in the finale. At any rate, the journey's almost over, and I look forward to redirecting my TV reviews from Star Trek over to Game of Thrones, which begins this Sunday. I am beyond fired up to see what the final season has in store for us. But what I'm really looking forward to in the world of science fiction and fantasy is the return of The Expanse. Season 4 will be coming later this year. I've been recently reading a lot of the books. As you can see, there's books 5 and 6 right here. Book 5 of The Expanse is one of the most entertaining books I've read in a long time. And I've actually got book 7 right here, which arrived today, and I'm very fired to crack open this sucker. So I think I've exhausted all I want to say about Star Trek for now. I hope you enjoyed this reaction and review. If you want to talk about science fiction, Star Trek, The Expanse, whatever, the best place to reach me is always on Twitter @Colbrax. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate the support. But more importantly, I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. But as always, onwards and upwards.